some of the issues of just broader terrorism that we see currently in Israel and the Gaza conflict as well. And so I've kind of toggled back and forth between both of those areas and not giving those up. And the late Dr. Suleiman again used to tell me, he says, you don't have to pick or choose. I'll stop there.
All right, good afternoon. Glad to be back here at Howard University. Originally from Ghana, my name is Dr. Francis Philip. Of course, you know, one of those immigrants from Ghana. I landed when I came here at East Stroudsburg, went to Stroudsburg University, ended up at Binghamton University, and I was so proud at Binghamton. I got to meet my I would say idol, and a great scholar, Dr. Mazique, who eventually, sent me down here to Howard. Yeah, because I wanted to do something in Africa, right? And unfortunately, it didn't kind of jive very good with the program, at Binghamton University. So Professor Mazique said, you know what, Francis, I will send you all the way to DC to go to Howard University. So he wrote a letter, and of course I brought it to Dr. Cham and said, okay, if Mazique says so, yeah, that's what it is. So that's why I came here. And of course, it was a very good, experience. I think I'll have, some time to expatiate on that. When I was done, I had to go to Canada. I was in Canada for 10 years and teaching at the University of Toronto, and then we had to come back again, currently I'm teaching here at Howard University. We did a very good experience, and as I said, the next line of questions I'll get to expand my research. Thank you very much.
Wow. Hi, everyone. It feels so good to be home. My name is Susie Okoro. I graduated from Howard University African Studies Department in 2014. And my journey began on that fateful day when I went to the political science department to submit my application, and they sent me to graduate school. I went to the graduate school and we filled out the forms, did everything, applied for my transcripts from Nigeria. And on our way home, I told my husband, let's go to the bookstore. We went to the bookstore, came out, and guess who we ran into? Professor Suleiman Emmanuel, who was my husband's dissertation committee chair in 1993. He introduced me and told him that I just went to submit my application for a doctoral program. And he was like, what department? I said, political science. He said, what are you going to do in political science to make a dent? You need to come to African Studies where you can tell them about who you are. And what are you going to tell Americans about America that they don't know already? And right there and then, he convinced me to change my plan of action. And I switched to African Studies. And that, to me, is the best decision of a lifetime. I joined African Studies, worked with him, and the greatest professors that you can ever imagine. Professor Edgar sharpened my intellectual, I don't know how to describe it, but he exposed us to research in such a way that it stuck with me forever. Dr. Zodi was amazing. Dr. Cham, oh my goodness. I learned African literature through him, and I will not forget Professor Haidu. These are amazing individuals that impacted my intellectual journey. Dr. Johnson, I mean, how can, if I keep naming them, we'll be here forever, and what they did. But this is the department that picks you up from nothing and turns you into something. During COVID, I was able to get an MBA. And that's MBA because I'm somebody who hates sitting in one place, not doing anything productive. So when COVID started, we were forced to stay at home. I'm like, what would I stay home for 6 months doing nothing? So I found an online program, completed an MBA program, and went into financial literacy campaign, merging it with my African studies experience. So what I do now is, first, I teach at UMBC. That's where I've been for the past 7 going to 8 years in the Africana Studies Department. I work closely with another great instructor, Professor Gloria Chukwu. And I combine it with my financial literacy campaign, which I focus on educating Africans and African Americans on financial issues that range from planning for retirement, making sure that they educate their children on budgeting, on their health. And why I focus on Africans is that there's so much that we don't know about this system. There's so much that we need to learn to educate ourselves, and because we said that education is the key. Knowledge is power, but what you do with that knowledge is more powerful. All right, so I will get into this, some more, and how everything I got from the African Studies Department here at Howard University, have empowered me to be on a mission to educate and to change the world. Thank you very much.
Akwaba, so happy to be here. My name is Dr. Kelly Page Jabril. I have been connected to Howard continuously for a long time. I came to Howard for my MBA and started the international business concentration and went on to a very successful corporate career. And I worked in 26 countries around the world and launched my own consultancy 10 years ago. And I'm a global strategist, implementer, and advisor. And I found that the work I was doing around the world, I worked across 5 continents, that whenever it came to Africa or an African nation, that those programs, projects, systems, implementations, entrepreneurship, startup endeavors, they were working, was not working. So I have worked in post-genocide countries like Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Sarajevo, and then I was in Rwanda post-genocide. There are just differences. So that ultimately is what drove me to come back to Howard to get my PhD in African Studies for an African-centric perspective and solutions. So I was pleased to have the academic space coming from a professional and practitioner space. And so I came back as adjunct faculty for Howard with the School of Business and helped to expand the international business program and taking students abroad and supporting African businesses and growing them around the continent. And so I'm absolutely delighted that I'm now back teaching in the African Studies Department, Intro to Contemporary Africa. So it's absolute joy. So we are ahead of the curve. Okay, excellent. People are saying, how are you leaving, the world of business, global business, right? MBA, all that good money. And African Studies people didn't understand the connection, but putting in the investment of time and having that vision, I think it's well understood now how the two certainly marry. When we talk about agency in academia, but we talk about self-sufficiency in terms of economies, right? So it's really holding on to that, so it's a joy. What brought me to the African Studies program, apart from my professional compelling reasons, is at the time I was recently crowned a Queen Mother in Cote d'Ivoire. And what was significant was that this was not an honorary throne. I was the first known returnee to the village in over 400 years. And when I arrived, the elders had been waiting for me, unbeknownst to me. So I really had to take a look at what does this really mean in terms of reconnecting and reclaiming an ancestral throne. And while I was a student here, my throne was elevated for the entire kingdom in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. So again, it's a different kind of practical application of what we study in terms of traditional systems and really what does that mean in reclaiming it. and cultural revival. And I had to learn, and I'm still learning everything, and taking that attitude in terms of my own humility of learning, but then applying it back to the continent and also just the diaspora as well. I think I will close this just by saying that I have always been a lover of African peoples around the world, and that's been one of the continuities of where I've worked or what I have studied. And so I've recently taken students to Colombia, for example, and connecting with the Palenque communities, Afro Colombian communities as well. So there's so much more for us to do, and I'm so glad that we have the faculty that we have today with the vision. And I look forward to looking at ways we can really mobilize to take all this exciting potential and the realization to the next level.
Hard act to follow. I'm in the middle, but interestingly connected enough, I also have an MBA. So
Every degree.
a host of other degrees as well. So I started my journey, my academic journey, not in a traditional sense. I come from what some people might say the wrong side of the tracks. I grew up in the projects. No one told me that seeking higher education, especially a PhD, was something that was attainable. But there was something within me that said that, hey, you know, I love learning. And so I kept going. So I started out as a psychology major in undergrad because I came from a very dysfunctional family and I wanted to figure out why they were all crazy. But just the dysfunction that comes with our existence in and after colonialism is what I came to understand when I took a sociology class, and I was like, wait a minute, we can talk about groups of peoples and intersections of race and gender and class. Oh, sign me up. So I ended up switching my major to sociology. I'm a lifelong learner. I've always been inspired by teachers, so I kept going. I went then and got my MBA, and I guess that wasn't enough. So I went to Regent and I ended up getting a master's in theology. And it was there that I began to look at the icons that were said to be in existence in the Bible and throughout other religious organizations. And I was like, somebody's missing. It's like a whole group of people that are talked about, but there's a lot of references to Africa, but I don't see the representation. So by the time I got to the end of my program, I had this itch and this inclination inside of me to just want to further research these names that I've come across. I want to know more about them, and a lot of them pointed to Africa. So on my very last paper, my instructor or professor wrote literally, girl, go get your PhD. Like this paper is absolutely amazing. And I began to do research because I was interested in Africa and all the things that I had not learned about Africa as I was in school. And I came across Howard. And Howard happened to be one of the only schools in the United States that had an African American studies program at the master's level, and then a PhD African studies program. So I was like, oh, sign me up today. Applied in 2017. We actually were in the same cohort together. I would like to say that was probably the liveliest cohort. No offense to anybody. Memorable. And it was there that I was shaped, and all of the questions that I had began to be answered. My friend here calls me a nerdling. So I ended up getting a job at Founders Library, and it was like heaven to me because I was amongst all the books. And I still am a collector of books and of African Africana studies, the Black experience. So I am lifelong learner, but I'm also an educator. So I've worked in the public school system for a span of about 17 years. And as I've been in the public education, I've seen the lack of, or the misrepresentation of the Black experience, or just the lacking all around where we're fighting just to have our existence validated. So within me, I've just felt like it was something that I had to do about it. So my mission is to continue to represent us in the way that we're supposed to be represented. Currently, my dissertation research was in reappraising African studies and Black history and finding the value in the Black existence. So in that, I am championing for a place for us to all unite. I've started a nonprofit called the Black Sanctuary that is a safe space for us to collaborate, to work on racism centered theories, to end oppression worldwide, because I think it's about time. So that's me in a nutshell. And
Thanks. So I started my journey at another HBCU, Johnson C. Smith University. It's one of the small HBCUs, so I definitely love to give them love because they are often overshadowed by Howard and Morehouse and all those. But while I was there, I did political science. My goal was to be the first Black woman on the Supreme Court. That didn't happen. I'm very happy for the women's there now. I mean, I let her go ahead and have that. But being at Johnson C. Smith, being at HBCU, loved it. And then I came to American University for my master's and really encountered a lot of racism. I was in their School of International Studies. A lot of, if African countries just follow world-wide policies, they'd be all right. And neoliberalism is great. And I knew that wasn't correct, but I didn't have the language at the time to say why. Then I took a consortium course here in African Studies. And I was like, yeah, no, I can't keep doing this. So I finished my master's and then came to Howard to the PhD program in African Studies. And it's, it was definitely, I knew where I wanted to be, where I needed to be. The program, lots of people who were influential. I know, Dr. Zode I was actually part of the student group that was there that really kind of championed for her being the first woman in a tenure track position in African Studies. This was like the early 2000s, 2002. So like, a long time. And I'm so proud of the department today and kind of looking at the representation that we have. So Dr. Zoe was hugely influential. Dr. Yang was my advisor, and he was just a wealth of knowledge and experience. And then I remember the year I finished, I graduated in 2006, that fall, coming up, I went to Dr. Edgar's office. I don't think you remember this, but I went to his office. I'm going to graduate this year, Dr. Edgar. He said, yeah, okay, we'll see. So I was like, okay, you know what? So that kind of lit a fire. And so I was like, all right. So I was, I finished in 2006 and then ended up in California State University, LA. And, it was a great campus. I was in the Pan-African Studies department, great department. But it is a teaching school. I wanted to do research. I wanted to have time to do research. If you're at a teaching school, you don't have a lot of time. The focus is on teaching. And so I was frustrated, and I happened to be on a flight with Dr. Sandra Vinny, and I was frustrated. I was telling her. And so she told me, if you want to get out, write your way out. And that was like, again, another fire that was lit, and I just started writing. And so luckily when the position at Howard African Studies came open, I felt like I was in a great position to apply. I had, the experience, I had 6 years of experience at Council LA, research. And then as I kind of kept going, I'm getting all these nuggets of information. And once, another mentor of mine told me in terms of research, not everybody who gets a PhD wants to go into academia. My students always remind me of that, because but not everybody who wants to go into academia wants to do research. I love research, so he was, telling me, look, the cycle you should have is always have something out for review, have something you're working on, have something in your head that you're thinking about. And I was like, huh, so I've kind of kept that, and it's allowed me to be really productive, having something out for review. I'm writing something, and then something is in my head for future research. All of it is connected in terms of what I'm, my topics. But that was also great nugget of advice. So, coming back to Howard, getting back into, the university where it's research focus has been great for me. So yeah, and I'm here. I'm an associate professor in African studies. I forgot to say that. I'm Dr. Mazique Clark. I'm Dr. Mazique Clark.
Dr. Melanie Jordan, sorry.
I won't take too much time, so good afternoon to everybody. My name is Nana. I started here at Howard when I was 17 years old, and I was an African Studies undergrad major. So I started, it feels like forever. It's been a long time since I've been in this room, so it just feels like an honor, especially to be surrounded by people who are professors and directors who are grad students. When I was an undergrad, with now become professors, it's just beautiful to see it full circle. But when I started here, I think I had a lot of different motivations for being in the African Studies department. Some of it was personal. I grew up in a family that was very sort of, a lot was going on in terms of how we understood each other, how we didn't understand each other. So there wasn't a lot of passing on of legacy and culture the way that I wanted. So coming to Howard for me was about being immersed around all types of Black people. I went to school in Prince George's County throughout my entire primary and secondary schooling, so I'd always known just Blackness is inherently central to education and learning, and I always loved learning, so that's what sort of brought me here. While I was here in undergrad, I did a lot of study. It was like the starting point for my overall studies, because I went on to pursue a master's and a PhD where I focused on just the history and development of education throughout Africa and the African diaspora. For me, I was interested in learning more about what made it so that many people had to migrate and pursue higher education in particular. And so in that dissertation work, there was a lot of archival work. I wasn't necessarily focused on the brain per se. I was focused more on people's lived experiences, how they captured their experiences while they were students, whether it was about their academics, their social lives, their politics. I followed a lot of African student groups who had done a number of numerous work across the country while they were based here before they returned to the United States, and also did studies of that. The same group, student migrants, to France and the United Kingdom as well. So that's sort of my dissertation work and studies. Currently, I'm an independent researcher. I own Diaspora Praxis, which is a mixed methods research consultancy. I'm currently working with the African Women's Development Fund. I've worked with them previously to help them develop their strategic plan for the next 10 years. And we're now working on an initiative to work with a collective of feminist funds throughout the continent in the face of the anti-rights and anti-gender movement that's rising throughout. And so that's one bit of work that I'm doing. And the other project is based here in the US, focuses on African migrants. I've done a lot of work with Black migrants overall. But I'm working with the Ohio Immigrant Alliance. We've wrapped up interviews with mostly Mauritanians who have been deported from the United States, as well as attorneys who work with Black migrants in the United States, period, to just capture their understandings of what their clients face when they navigate immigration court, which is like an explicit anti-Blackness, which is also explicit anti-Africanness, a refusal in terms of providing basic resources, in particular around translation, so overall denials of justice. So that report should be coming out in December or January. It's been quite a ride and a lot of work to do, but still sort of, for me, very important and sort of core and central to a lot of what I learned here, which was really sort of making sure in the process of doing research and in the process of sort of engaging the community, making sure to stand up and stand out loud, in particular when injustice is being faced, in particular by marginalized communities. So that's been my work, and I think I owe most, if not all, of my intellectual surroundings and understandings to Howard. This was a place that allowed me to be free in ways intellectually that I did not experience in my master's and PhD programs. I won't talk too much about those experiences. I don't think I really want to. It felt, if honest, it was anti-Black in itself. And so I think for me, the push to finish the dissertation more than anything, which that dissertation centered a lot of the archive of Black migrants, Black migrant scholars here in the US. It was to really honor their voices and perspectives in a way in educational studies. Sometimes it just feels like African existence is just not of any consequence. There's no documentation of what really was massive human rights violations, in my opinion, in terms of the colonial education system. And so that's what my work has been rooted at, working on some chapters to hopefully turn this large, or transform the dissertation into a larger book that's just much more accessible to people, and captures just our stories and histories. So, yeah.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing from each of your introductions is that, you know, linking it back to what Dr. Johnson talked about earlier, it's the foundation of the study of Africa being one centered in diverse, particular African experiences. Secondly, it's interdisciplinary at its core, which actually goes against the field of African studies at other institutions. And I actually want to talk, I want your input on that. In terms of it being narrowly focused to studying history, and then history, right? Contemporary Africa really doesn't factor in unless it's a narrow course, and maybe IR, international relations, and then transformation. All of your intros talked about how you're using your research to make change, which I think is fundamental to our program, and it's deeply embedded in the culture of Howard University, the African Studies at Howard University. So some of you didn't talk about your current research projects. If you're engaged in an innovative project, if, as Dr. Clark mentioned, if there's something in your mind that you're ready to put out there, will you share a little bit about that before we talk more about, you know, your experience in the department? I just want folks to get a sense of what interdisciplinarity looks like in action.
Thank you. I will add that I met a wonderful visiting Fulbright scholar when I was in the program. Her name is Dr. Elise Ajumani, and she teaches comparative literature at the University of Puy-Bonny in Abidjan. And she pioneered the comparative studies between the Francophone, Franc-Afrique, and the African-American literature. So no one had really done that, so it was French, Anglo to Anglo. So it was such an honor. Well, she's working on an anthology now of African scholars examining the impacts of slavery and the slave trade from the African-American perspective. So this is just a reflection of her experience at Howard, and I'm just so proud that you now have African scholars embracing it and understanding it even as a part of their own history and story, and being able to reimagine and doing the research on that. So I'm contributing, I'm the only non-African contributor to this anthology on the impact of slave trade and areas of gaps. So that's one thing I wanted to share. So it's not just those who are fully enrolled in the program, but it's also those who are passerbys for that cross-pollination, those relationships. In terms of interdisciplinary, that's where I live at the crossroads. So currently I'm working on a project with some top music industry experts, and we are literally building a platform for music professionals so they're able to better tour and find each other within the music industry, particularly African artists, where we're all aware of the Afrobeats, Amapiano, etc. So you talk about interdisciplinary, this is the arts, this is technology, this is entrepreneurship, it's so many things. So that's something that's really, really exciting, but we've expanded it. So if you are a stylist, if you're a photographer, if you're a sound engineer, beyond the actual artist. So that's a very exciting project platform that I'm working on. And secondly, I'd like to share that I helped to transform the cashew and mango sectors in Cote d'Ivoire. So using the business expertise what we did was, we talked about this, not only the resource curves, but extracting the raw materials from the continent and wanting to have a value chain, right, and vertical integration, which are very big MBA terms that were welcomed in the African Studies Department. And so we're actually doing that now and helping to change some of the mindsets in terms of how are you able to take ownership of your raw materials and what do you need to do to access those new markets. So we've transformed $1 billion cashew sector in Cote d'Ivoire where they're now able to directly export to the United States and Europe. But a lot of the learnings were necessary for African studies in order for me to help design something that was effective. My training in the business school alone would not have been sufficient to transform that industry. So now we're working on the mango sector, doing the same thing. By the way, from an interdisciplinary perspective, you've got 80% of your cashew farmers are women or processors, and similar for mango. So this is where you have all these intersectionality, right? And you talk about gender studies, and you have to culturally understand what that impact is if you are literally changing industry and those who are working in it and the downstream impacts for that society. So history alone and business alone are not going to help you create those kinds of systems and change.
So a couple of things that I'm working on are just recently. So my second book was titled America's Other Muslims, put out by Women in Littlefield Press. And that was dealing with a lot of issues that you probably can imagine dealing with the broader issues of extremism. And that was, I think, very exciting because I was able to work from a policy perspective with a lot of governments worldwide, including the US, and really look at the formula, particularly the African American experience and some of the techniques to combat extremism. So that's one. The two other items that I'm working actually presently that I'm about to should be publishing next year. The first one is titled Low Country Spiritual Diasporic Networks, and this is recentering sacred space in the American South. I'm co-editor with Dr. Elizabeth West at Georgia State, and this is with University of South Carolina Press. And very excited what that brings about, editing a number of essays on that from religion, culture, music, fascinating. The second book, the second book that will be out next year is with Oxford University Press, with entitled Gullah Geechee Muslims. This is the first of its kind work that has not been done at all. I've been in the archives. It's about a 3-year project in the making. I have translated, I'm a rewrite Arabic, and I was able to translate and find some uncovered documents. I've done oral history of communities in Savannah, Hilton Head, in some of the coastal towns in Edisto and Charleston. My mother's a Gullah Geechee, so I speak the language and understand the culture. Fascinating intersection between Africa and also America. And when I went to undergrad, I was part of my research. Just a few other projects that might be of interest too as well is, you might have heard the opera called Omar. I was the advisor on the Islamic and the history component of that opera. That was with the famous Rhiannon Giddey. And it was showcased in Charleston, it was in LA, it was in a few other places too. Well, it's about to go to the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. And that project's quite interesting because it shows the intersection of how you can use history and with arts and culture. So I offer that to you all, that you can be as creative as you want to be in this expertise that we've been grounded in right here at Howard. And last but not least, I'll just offer this to you as well. I mentioned I do the academic side, but somehow I also work in technology. And because of my background, I worked in government. I'm a vice president at a company called Salesforce. You might have heard of it. And I run their global security issues or intelligence efforts there. And that is new tech, that is new technology, that is worldwide. And the emerging markets are in Africa. Europe is tied up, the dollar has limits. And so I offer that to you is that, you know, in this space of technology AI advancement, they are in need of expertise that can really offer grounded perspective and moving beyond the headlights of Africans needing the assistance of Europeans and how you engage with Africans themselves. So I'm at the conversation, not in the form of what Dr. Suleiman Yang said. You have to move from the footnote to the main text. We are the main text.
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit to what my colleagues here say in terms of the issue of interdisciplinary and how it brings a whole lot of focus on intellectual areas in solving contemporary world. In this contemporary world that we are, most of the problems that we need to solve should be resolved via interdisciplinary perspective. And I'm glad that our department in African Studies kind of champions that. One of the things that made Professor Mazique very I would say famous, and so when we began to look at international relations from the perspective of culture, right? And he talks about cultural forces in world politics. I'm like, how are you kind of scientifically going to study culture, which is very intractable to some extent, I even mixed it to, he was able to do that, and I'm bringing this, to our undergraduates and graduates, don't be shy of asking the questions, right? Things like, so this is one of the things that I do to look at, reconceptualization, this big concept that we have, for example, talk about development, right? One of the questions I asked myself, well, what's the African concept of development, right? Are we missing something? How do African people, see the issue of development? And I'll give you this example. I was doing 1 year visiting professorship work until the kind of food side of and this lady that worked with USAID back in Ghana, in Northern Ghana, basically trying to help women to be able to be self sustenance in terms of their economic so this woman came to me and said, I've observed something in Northern Ghana. We are trying to give them money so that they'll be able to establish themselves, whilst their husbands are out there in the field working, they'll be able to buy this and that and kind of do some trade. But when we give them this money, we don't add any interest to it. But we say, okay, pay it in 2 years, right? And then 2 years they come to pay the money. This thing has been going on, but I haven't seen any kind of real development, And then I was like, well, this is interesting because in this part of the world, if somebody owes money and then, they become to pay, we think they're doing well, right? So when she said that, I'm like, have you find out, the concept of borrowing among this particular ethnic group? How do they see borrowing? Does the borrowing money from someone, does it, what does that do to them? Does it increase their status? Does it reduce their status? Or how do they feel? Because all of these things will have, impact. So I'm like, it is possible that this money that you give them, they probably don't use it, or they probably tuck it somewhere. And of course, Black people, people, let's say in Northern Ghana, if a white lady or white people are giving them the money, they will smile and take the money, but instead of them telling them that, this thing kind of reduces my status, in the society, our community, borrowing means that you are beholden to someone and things like that, So we need to really reconceptualize some of these concepts. Otherwise, it will be holding us back. And we found out that, that situation was happening among this, society, right? So, US will put money in the USAID will try to put money in there, but the results will never be gotten. So as students, we need to understand that there are some real stuff within African society. They are real stuff within societies that we need to understand. Otherwise, a lot of these problems that we have on the continent can never be resolved because there are real needing culturally that enable people to either progress or not to progress.
Wow, thank you very much. My dissertation focused on international migration of Igbo women to the United States. And I looked at, was it brain drain, brain gain, or brain circulation? Think about it. All right. What I did was try to see how the migration of women from that part of the country left those communities that they left, either in need of their skills and their economic contributions to their communities, and then look at them over here to see if they are actually giving back to the communities that they left. That particular question pushed me into founding a women organization that just celebrated our 14th year in existence. I founded that organization. Thank you. It was State Women Association. And what we do is we organize fundraising activities over here, and each member is encouraged to go back to their communities and do something and show us. Why did we start doing that? USAID and other funding organizations provide money and military assistance that never trickle down to the communities. They end up in large cities and rural women are left to suffer. I believe in the practical application of what you have learned. And African Studies gave me the opportunity to do just that. And I'm so proud to report that up till today, those women and other women are now copying our model. Because you can't say that you gave $2.5 billion for development in Africa and people are still dying of hunger. With my African studies and my business background, we now started on a new program of microfinancing. Instead of providing palliatives that we did during COVID, you know what palliatives are, right? Giving them food, bringing rice, all those staples that they need to survive and feed their children. We now empower them with, do you know how far $200 can go to a rural woman? So if you receive about $2,000 to $3,000 and let the women get together and plan, give you a blueprint of what they want to do with that money. If their plan makes sense, you give them that money and give them 6 months to show you the results. If it doesn't show any good result, give me back my money. All right? If you don't give me back my money, I will take your farmland. I mean, make it real. Make it real, and it inspires them to go out and work. Some of the strategies that we have adopted in the past were more theoretical. Today, we are applying. My major project now is to make sure that those women are equipped with what they need to put food on the table for their families. All right? That to me is what development is all about. That to me is development. When I see them in a new wrapper, I'm like, okay, she's making progress. She's now tying a new wrapper. Some of them will compress. Until you started things, I was not able to buy a new wrapper for myself.
Yes.
In the last 10 years, but because of the profits from my business, because of the profit, I'm able to change a wrapper in 10 years. I'm able to provide 2 meals. Two meals a day for my family. I mean, when I call them, okay, give me a report every month, once every month. Sometimes we get on Zoom, they now have cell phones. Can you believe that? In the villages. That was what I gained from this. with your African studies degree, you can do so much. The interdisciplinary approach to it is amazing. You can get into business, you can get into research. On the research side, I published my dissertation and turned it into a nice book that won the NSA award in 2017. Involvement in the diaspora and community development in Southeastern Nigeria. I looked at those organizations, what they are doing and what they are still doing, and how those things are impacting the lives of people. I also co-edited a book on the Nigerian Biafran War with Gloria Chukwu, where I interviewed a number of women, old women, they're all in their 90s right now, a few of them left. And they told us stories that were never reported anywhere. When wars are fought, the roles women play are often ignored. Women are not even mentioned. Those women worked very hard. They traded. They provided the support that the men needed to fight those wars. They negotiated for peace to return because their husbands were being killed, their children were being killed. So they were involved in the wars too. So why are they not represented in the history books? If you look at the role of women in conflict resolution, you will hardly find them. Why are we not talking about ourselves and what we do? It is time to improve on that. It is time to let people know that women are playing important roles in conflicts. And when the war is over, the men are given awards and the women are ignored. My third project is on African names. I am so intrigued by how relevant African names are. And when you bear an African name, you are not only being called a name, but you call a name that represents the circumstances surrounding your birth. There's no African name without a meaning. I was a second grade teacher for like 10 years. And I collected a lot of African names, especially from Ethiopia. I love their names. And I'm planning to put that into a book. I've been working on it and I've been collecting more names. I teach African culture and development at UNBC, in addition to my contemporary African history class. All right. And what I tell them is, your name is not just a name, it carries the history of your family. Whenever you tell me your African name, well, the first thing I ask is, what does it mean? Some will say blessing, some will say good fortune, some will say mothers are precious, which is Lega. So when you mention your name, an African name, or when people call you your African name, bear it with pride because it comes with your history. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Just very quickly, I'm sure several folks in the room have read Weep Not Child as well as Nervous Conditions. And so reading that as an undergrad for me, because like I said earlier, coming to Howard, a lot had to do a lot of research about my history, my family's history. And reading those books was the first time I was able to sort of imagine my parents in Ghana and Sierra Leone during colonial time in school, and really understanding how they suffered in those spaces, the sacrifices that came going through the colonial education system from beginning to end point, to whatever degree it was that you attained. And that always stuck with me, and that influenced and shaped my methodology and my framework throughout my education process. While at PWI, where I'm talking about the challenges, but also the opportunities and the brilliance of these different migrants who we may just know them like we know Nkrumah as president of Ghana, but we don't know him as a student who struggled here in the United States and said so explicitly in his biography in terms of just even being able to pay for school. But in a lot of that, he talked about what it was to be at an HBCU, what it was to be supported by other Black people to finish its educational program. So that was what helped me, I think, not only just sort of shape my syllabi, because there was something about, I could give you as many articles on this, well, I a horrible thing that happened to so many people, but if I give you not child or I give you nervous conditions, you get it in a way that is much more deeply impactful and intimate. So I was able to pair those readings with a lot of the deeper policy research that I did. I remembered and recalled all of the different Pan-African conferences we talked about, and also thought about the different conferences that Europeans were having at the same time that shaped the policies and shaped the law that was influencing our lives during those periods. And so that was really influential for me to rethink what an archive was, to rethink how we store our knowledge and our data over time, space, and place. So I was able to do, I think, in place of a formal sort of interview series and archival, like formal archive of what these experiences were. And that's what I hope to be part number 2. I do want to email, I want to interview as many people as I can who had this experience to document it, because it's often just, that's what happened. But what happens, yes, when you're taught and you're told that a white man discovered a river that your ancestors have known forever, you know, seriously, what happens when you're raised within, educated within an assimilationist society and educational system? And I think a lot of the leaders we learned about throughout, and I learned about throughout this process, was also what I want you to say, well, what happened and how do things evolve over time? So definitely all the classes, all the bits of knowledge, whether it's a novel, like a documentary or a novel or a formal paper, all of these things are essential to our understandings of African and Black life.
So as my wonderful colleagues have said, there is a intersection also of narratives and history and our history, and organizing that in a way where our stories are told not just to us, but they're told by us is my goal and purpose beyond my research, to make a place where they can be collected and they can also be archived and preserved, and people know that this is the place that you can find them, because that is also important, because we know our stories exist as we talk amongst each other, but where can you go to find those in a place that you know that they'll all be there waiting? So that is the thing in my head that I'm currently working on, and is the vision for the nonprofit that I'm starting called the Black Sanctuary.
I just published a book on Black African women in digital spaces, looking at how women of African descent use digital spaces to engage in sexism and racism. And it's, you know, it's academics, activists, artists, we have essays, poems, and scholarly art chapters. And we intentionally published with Mazique Nyota, which is a Tanzania-based publisher. In my opinion, one of the best publishers in East Africa. The individual who's the head of that publishing house, Walter Magoya, also was on the team that published How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which was written when Walter Riley was in Tanzania. So it was always a dream of mine to work with them, and they kind of said no to my first project, and I came back, I gave them that published project, and it was like, look, I mean, so they were like, okay, submit something. And then I'm also finishing up revisions on an article looking at African studies, the whole kind of idea around decolonizing African studies, and using honestly hip hop studies, which kind of emerged already decolonized. I mean, it's the methodologies, theoretical frameworks in hip hop studies are amazingly liberatory, and really kind of questioning, can we use some of those methodologies in African studies? Can they become you know, holding people accountable for what they write, and, you know, engaging communities as peoples, not as subjects. So doing a couple articles on that. I'm also guest editing a special issue of the Journal of African Cultural Studies on language and hip hop in Africa. Kind of visiting the question Achebe and Wakyongo had about which language do you use, and how rappers in different countries are grappling with that. And in different countries it looks differently. And then I'm also working on a project that is, I'm hoping to get funding for, because I need the funding. But I'm looking at the relationships, the similar histories, parallels, and relationships between colored South Africans and African Americans. And looking at how, both predominantly urban communities, specifically through the lens of hip hop. Urban communities have the similar history of rape and violence, similar histories in terms of drugs and current violence happening in the communities, and just looking at also how those parallels help explain why colored South Africans were the first to adopt hip hop. Actually looking at the screen and seeing themselves in their, multiple shades and colors and urban experiences dealing with police. And how it would be almost a decade really before Black South Africans began to actually perform hip hop. So looking at that relationship between colored South Africans and African Americans, which has always been complicated, but I feel like a lot of people don't really know a lot of the similarities, and a lot of people on this side don't understand the colored identity and how in very many ways, the fact that they took a language that they were forced to learn and have made it their own, much like African American vernacular English. There's just so many parallels, but I think we hear colored and we think, oh, they just don't want to admit that they're Black. But through those segregation and all of that, formed an identity, a language, a community, a culture, just like African Americans. So if you say that, they don't exist or they don't have a culture, then you're saying African Americans don't have a culture, because there's just so many parallels. So I really want to explore that through the lens of hip hop, and how colored South Africans, specifically in K-Town, have really kind of engaged in hip hop and have seen themselves connected to African Americans while simultaneously harboring anti-Black views regarding Black South Africans. So it's like a contradiction. How are you connecting with African Americans, but you harbor anti-Blackness regarding Black South Africans? So it's very, complicated. And I've talked to different communities because I really wanted to know. The question is, do I have a right to tell that story? Do I have a right to, because it's such a sensitive topic? And so that was kind of one of my biggest concerns, and I've really taken, great steps to talk to people and make sure I'm asking the right questions, make sure I'm being respectful, thank you, of people's histories and people's traumas. And so that is kind of the project that I'm hoping to be able to start this summer if I can. Hip Hop African Podcast. So the Hip Hop African podcast started back 2016, 2017, initially as a platform for student projects in my Hip Hop in Africa class. And then it just kind of emerged into something else, wanting to have intellectual conversations with artists as scholars in their own right. And so we are like the most downloaded podcast on Hip Hop in Africa. And now, there aren't that many. So it's definitely been a great project, and I've enjoyed working on it. And I've enjoyed including students. Miranda is an associate producer on the project. Y'all has written content for the project. Marta has also helped out with the, so being able to work with students on this has been great, and having them work in a non-traditional way in terms of scholarship and producing knowledge, which I think in African studies, other fields are kind of doing it more. African studies, we're slowly kind of getting there to recognizing the diverse ways that you can produce knowledge and present knowledge. So it's been, it's also been a great project.
Talking about your work in that podcast. So I think that speaks to, how groundbreaking your research is and your methodologies. So with that, I'm now going to open the floor to the audience. What do you say?
For Dr. Clark, right? Because I really went through it in grad school, y'all. It was a very white space. And you brought me back to my conversation. That was the first one I did. Right? You also had publishing opportunities like co-edited with a graduate student at the time. And also that was my first academic publication. And I know there are a lot of, in particular, African women who can say they had this experience under you because of your support, your mentorship, and just your work in creating a space. So I wanted to give you your flowers and say thank you.
Questions from the audience, I mean, if you're writing your methodology section right now, you may want to get some open free advice. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I think I might be the oldest alone in here. I graduated in 1976 from the African Studies Department. I don't want to keep saying you're a baby. But my question is not to the panel, because I've heard enough of them. It's really to the students when I tell you a little bit about how I became an African study. So I came from Jamaica studying Spanish and French. And then I took Dr. Martha Cobb, I did have Afro-Hispanic studies. Then I did a master's in education, so I have 4 degrees from Howard by 28 and 2 kids. Come on. And then I said, well, what the devil am I going to do? I wanted to do a PhD really, and I really wanted to do it. And I said, Spanish. I don't know how I ended up doing African studies, but first of all, I bought my first car from Dr. Nien. And I had just got my driver's license, just to tell you can do it. And guess what? I knew how to drive automatic. And I was working on my dissertation and I moved to Landover Hills after separating from my husband and my kids. All of them were put behind. So the kids were in Jamaica with a grandma and I was in Landover. So I said, well, gears are 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 is supposed to make you go forward, but I'm going to start with 1. So I would drive from Landover to Howard. So everybody got out of my way and I got here really fast. No, it's true. I finally learned how to put the car in 4 because I was scared and I used to park right in front of here. Guess what? I came early. And I drove right up to the front gate because it was empty, because I only knew how to go forward. Okay, fast forward. So I was taught by Dr. Nyan, and then I met Leon Damas. And he said, I didn't even know who he was because I'm from Jamaica. We don't learn about our blackness like that. He said, no, you don't need to study Spanish now. You need to study something to do with Jamaica and Africa. Oh, well, if your professor says that, it's like, amen, hallelujah, yes, I'll do it. So I did study that. So at Howard, I had Nyan, C.L.R. James, Elliot Skinner. I know, touch me, boo. Oh, but guess what? African Studies Department didn't want me. That's I taught Spanish at home. And humanities, one of the best too. And I just finished traveling to over 100 countries. So my mother is a Centurion. I traveled to 100 countries and I crossed the deadline. So today is Friday and tomorrow's Friday too. Hello. So the point I'm making is, and I'd like some of you to ask anybody here, not just the panel, if where you going from this room. It's not just how many books. I don't write a whole bunch of books, but I write very well. Hello. What am I Facebook page? Because Roger May, the famous Jamaican writer, is my first cousin. Because his mommy and my dad's mommy, no second, whatever number it's, I'm not going to like that. But they came out of the same womb, okay? So what I'm saying is, it's not where you start, but where you finish. And sometimes you start in Spanish and French, you end up doing African studies, and you go back to teaching Spanish here. But guess what? it taught me I could travel the world, because when I put that on my resume, it's a PhD in African studies, I think it's curiosity, it's not that I was so smart. They think we have to meet her because she must be some strange creature. So I would like you to ask whoever you want to ask in here, if you're wavering between doing engineering and Spanish, or everybody wants to go to the med school as they go to Africa first and study some language. So I did Swahili. So ask them how you could maneuver something that you've been juggling in your mind, but you're not sure what to do with it. Because there's the expertise in here, including me. I mean, I'm just joking. I already thought, I think I thought Kamala Harris was low, but I have to prove it. But no, he laughed. No, this is true. But during COVID, we didn't go to the laundress functions that I'm usually invited to. So I didn't get to meet her in person, but she's on my Facebook, so hello.
Just a quick plug, please scan the QR code if you want to learn more about who all of these pioneers were that we're talking about. Beyond the mods, Hansberry, it's all in the digital program. So questions?
Respond or piggyback to that quickly. I would like to say we all have a unique role, right? We all have various perspectives, and we all have things that, there are things I can do and get away with that maybe you can, and vice versa. We have to really understand each other as an ecosystem toward the emergence of African studies in Africa, and really the healing and reuniting of her diaspora. There are things I can do as an African American where I may inspire. Sometimes being, let's say, an outsider or an insider has its advantages and disadvantages. So I want everyone to really understand the value of where you're coming from and your perspectives, and how that adds to the puzzle. You're each a unique puzzle piece, and it's certainly necessary. And so my interest, we talk about language, my interest in traditional language has actually done a language revival, and there are WhatsApp groups and free trainings and things on the continent for both urban and people in the village to relearn and capture traditional language and see the value of that. That value was because an American woman came and reminded them of how rich it was, and that kind of validation. Should what I say carry that much weight? No, but it did for reasons we understand. What's my point? My point is, we don't necessarily have to do everything ourselves. You could be that source of inspiration and let that catalytic energy really take off. So I just want to share that with you, because there are so many priority ones. What do we start with all the needs, right? But I think in terms of understanding your unique role and your contribution, what you are able to do that maybe others cannot do, what you know that others may not intrinsically know, there's value. We have to uphold each and every one of us in this room to understand that we are a unique key that will unlock a certain lock in this. So I just want to share that and let you know that with your voice, your perspective, and really anyone who's made it to this hallowed room right now really carries weight and gravitas, what you say, and in terms of inspiration. So yes, do what you are called to do, but also inspire and encourage and validate others so they may do it as well.
Kevin, do you have a question? Okay. All right, so we're gonna take a few questions and then wrap it up.
Hello, man. Should I stand up there or how should I supposed to be? Okay, so I guess I'm a half blood. Basically, my mother is Black and my dad is Nigerian. My name is Angel Akile. I am a junior international affairs major, Portuguese and African studies minor. And so to answer the question, I came through the African Studies department to declare that as my minor through Portuguese. I did a study abroad in Brazil, and Brazil, Salvador Bahia, has the most amount of Black people outside of the motherland, Africa. And so I just had the most amazing professors in the African Studies department. 2 of them are sitting up there right now. And yes, I don't really have a question, but that's all I want to say. Thank you.
I think this question was raised by Dr. Clark in this idea of writing about a different society. Like I know, like for me, I'm Ethiopian. I feel very comfortable to speak on behalf of Ethiopians. Well, I shouldn't feel too comfortable, but you know, but when we are writing about other groups, how can we kind of check ourselves so we're not doing the same thing that we're often angry about doing?
That's great, thank you for asking that, Toby. I think even when we're coming from community, so, you know, originally from Tanzania, and remember being asked to write something on feminism, gender, and politics in Tanzania, and I wrote it with a group of young Tanzanian feminists who were in Tanzania. I did not feel comfortable, you know, on my own because I had not been on the ground. I just did not feel comfortable. It would have been very easy to just say, yeah, of course, you know, and to write it. So I think humbling ourselves, I think working with community members as partners. Sometimes you're asking the wrong research questions. So you need to check yourself and ask the right questions. Making sure that you're having those conversations, that you're not treating communities like you're just coming in to take data and leaving. How does your research contribute to them? How does your research, and you're not speaking for them, but how do you use your work as a platform for them to speak for themselves? So I think all of that is important, and like, you know, even those of us who are from the continent, being educated in the West, you're taught that, you know, you are the expert. You know, and it's like, no, kill it, don't, that's problematic. Yes.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit to that. I mean, don't be afraid to, you know, ask questions. And then don't be afraid to bring in, you know, community, you know, members. When I went to Sierra Leone to, you know, collect data for my research on my dissertation, what I did, you know, I understood right off the gate that there are certain cultural, you know, sensitive stuff that from Ghana, you know, I'll take, oh, Ghana is an African country, Sierra Leone is an African country, so the cultures are the same, so I can just go to, you know. But I found out that, you know, that wasn't the case. So I had to hire, you know, someone that I paid, you know, and try to find out, you know, some of the very sensitive questions that I have on my survey, you know, how does that sound to them, you know, and then, you know, make sure I get the check, you know, that this is how it is, you know, so I can stepping on somebody's stool and things like so. You might be coming from a similar countries, but the cultures are different, you know, and getting someone to help you in that regard, you know, kind of gets you or help you to get the maximum right response, you know, because if you ask a question that doesn't sound that good to these people, they wouldn't give you all the response that you want. So it would be good to involve the community members. I remember I went to one particular area and I was told I need to see the mayor there. You know, they call him a village headman, you know, and that's how I connected. And then he directed me to another person, you know, and then, you know, that individual seemed to know. So, so that we'll tell the story, you know, so that we don't look like somebody else is telling our story for us, which we don't like, you know, involve the community members, I'm saying.
I'll be brief. There's a really good book that I've really cherished over the past 10 years. It's been really good. It's Research is Ceremony. Because it really offers a nice way of how, when you're engaging in the research process, that there's a sacred process, a sacred journey you are embarking upon when you are extracting knowledge and you're creating new knowledge. And so there's a few others too as well, but that book just came to mind as we're talking about this.
So I actually think this is a great opportunity to start with Dr. Clark with closing thoughts, actually. If that's okay. So,
something real big.
can you be a part of your closing thoughts? I see folks, I think kind of, is that okay with you, Dr. Makoto?
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm part of it.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to chip in, please. Well, it starts with selecting a topic you're very comfortable with. All right, because if you're not comfortable with the topic, you may not get all the answers that you need. All right, and you cannot spend 6 months of research in a place and become an expert in that area. All right, so please make sure that you are very sensitive. Allow them to do more of the talking. Keep your questions and make sure you study the culture. In my culture class, I tell students, please, before you walk into a place to do your research, make sure that you study them and know your limits. Make sure you don't cross the line, because once you cross the line, it will destroy your research because you will not get the correct answers. Thank you.
I just want to say something about the consent form. This consent form often is problematic. Our people have a history of signing stuff they don't really understand and they get their land taken away. So I've personally, interviewing artists and so forth, have really communicated via email. I mean, my publishers have been okay with having that email history of them consenting to participate in the interview. But even if you have them sign something, making sure the language is accessible and that you're, kind of being mindful of that, because that consent form, it can be very alienating for some.
Any other final thoughts in terms of practical advice?
I would say, I just graduated in May, and make sure it's something you're passionate about and that you can do for the rest of your life. Because if you're going to go into academia and it's something that you're gonna be serious about, that's what's going to keep you going. That kept me going through the pandemic. So I started out, we were on campus, and then I didn't see Howard for 3 years. And I have built very strong connections, but it was the passion that burned within sometimes that kept me going, because that could not be extinguished.
For me and for others, embarking upon African studies is a spiritual journey. Spiritual journey in terms of self, and spiritual in terms of the validation of our own existence and cosmology. And many of us will say we were led by the ancestors to the point of starting and all the way through finishing and shaping what you study. And I think understanding that inherent African gift is important, and one I think has been respected within the department. And so if you're feeling compelled or you're called to do something, let it be a spiritual journey as much as it is intellectual and or academic or professional, in terms of the betterment of yourself, and therefore also just the healing journey. We are really quite honored to be in a position to revive and restore and replenish history and to shape the future and leave future nuggets of knowledge, right, and leads and ideas and solutions for future generations. So I think that's one of the things that's really rich and hasn't really been spoken about with respect to this department, is understanding that spiritual soul connection that we may have, and also just the ancestral lineages that really bring us all together.
Great, so Dr. Wiafe Wako will have the final word.
Yeah, thank you. I also would like to advise undergraduate students, trying to kind of only in their major, sometimes they look at African studies, they say, okay, some area studies, so they don't want to major in African studies. But one thing that I would like to say here is that this is in a program that is interdisciplinary, right? So if you take a course in, let's say, women in Africa, take it all the way, right? Because that's going to give you an insight in the issues of women. If you take a course that is development, experience with it, take it all the way and you get something in development, right? And then you take a course in language and literature, deep into it, take it all the way, and then you have that kind of intellectual knowledge in language and language. So it's not just African studies that is too small, but within it, there are a lot of, areas that you can go into, right? So don't be afraid at all to say, I'm doing a bachelor's degree in African, because there's a lot of stuff in there.
Just to wrap it up, I just want to say this, making sure to honor and cherish and really sort of be in the moment of the relationships that you create here, the bonds here, the people that you work with. I've met some of the most fascinating, some of the most intelligent, some of the most innovative people at this university and in this department, and there's nowhere else like it. And so also being able to come back consistently and be welcomed back. Like, this is truly home. Like, it's homecoming week, right? Like, I've never seen such a space, and in particular with students in African studies, whether we're undergrad or graduate. Because I started as an undergrad, and there was so much respect that everybody I encountered had for me, and there was just so much family, everyone eat, writing together, presenting together. So making sure to cherish and hold on to that as you create and as you do your work, because the work that we do, while innovative and while touching the lives of so many, can be really difficult, can be really hard. It touches the heart, the spirit. And like for someone like me, this historical work, sometimes it can be also traumatic. Right? And having those bonds to lean into, having people to co-author with, having people to be your peer reviewers, maybe when you're writing something you don't feel sure, is something that you should never take for granted.
Thank you so much for dedicating your time, your energy, and I dare say your love to the department. Please read their bios online. With that, we have a break and we're going to reconvene at 3:15 for the final session.